Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Normally the session before lunch is the one that, or after lunch is the one that you don't really want to be doing. I think given the two presentations that I've just been through, with Osama, who's the celebrity in the room right now, and Dr. Lynn, I'm going to call you the brain. It's like following an episode of Pinky and the Brain, if you're familiar with that show, that TV show. I'm going to change things up quite a bit. I'm from the Economic Development Board of Bahrain, and maybe you're familiar with the work that we've been trying to do to I suppose, modernize and digitize Bahrain. We've been working in a lot of different areas, and I just wanted to give you an update on that. But I wanted to put it in the context of disruption as an enabler for growth, because we've looked to do that. We've looked to poke our traditional industries and challenge them to disrupt themselves and see the growth that we can build on the back of that. I think we're sitting here in Dubai, and they're a great example of how you've done that really well. We got a great presentation earlier on from Hussein about how customs have used new technologies. I'm going to talk a little bit more than just technologies, because disruption can come in a lot of different ways. Before I do that, I just wanted to introduce ourselves. So, Economic Development Board of Bahrain, we're chaired by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Our job is about attracting and assisting companies to set up operations in Bahrain. And we do that through offering guidance, facilitation on the setup, and ongoing aftercare. So treating companies that choose Bahrain as a home from an account manager perspective. We work in a number of different verticals, so financial services being a very big one for Bahrain. About 400 financial institutions based in Bahrain, and it has a long history and pedigree in that space. Manufacturing, logistics, and tourism are all big industries as well. And ICT is a new area. I suppose a growing area for Bahrain. I head up the ICT team and the startup teams in the Economic Development Board of Bahrain, and that's where I'm seeing where the disruption is coming through. That's where we want to actually drive. We're looking to our startups. Most of those startups are on the tech side, and we're looking to them to drive disruption, but we're also open to bringing disruption from outside. I guess when we look at disruption, or when I look at disruption, obviously everybody thinks about technology, and it's the easy one. Oh, technology is going to be the disruptor. But there's a lot of other items at play as well. Just the business models and how things are done. I think it was interesting to hear Osama talk about Kareem, that it started very manual, and then it started to use technology. And it just shows you that the business model could have been done if you had enough people. You couldn't scale it, obviously. But it wasn't the technology that drove. It was the business model, and then the technology helped you to implement the business model. There's changes on industrial sector as well. Society is changing. Our wants and our needs and how we're looking to do things are changing and disrupting how old businesses have run. Globalization, it's kind of taken a little bit of a backseat right now as different governments are looking to maybe do more in-house, but I think it's a trend that can't be stopped. There might be a brake put on it right now with our different governments, but I think overall there's an openness to globalization. Demographics are a big one, and that's a very big issue for the region here in pushing forward disruption. And obviously global urbanization, when you actually pull people together into bigger groups, different solutions, different services are now possible where they wouldn't have been before. Some of the trends that we're seeing, and these are obviously they're pretty familiar to you, the whole subscription and how it's changing newspaper industry, freemium in software as a service, customer convenience, the food delivery and those types of solutions. These are all the things that are changing and disrupting industries. What I wanted to just focus a little bit on is, and maybe this is where I'm going to spend most of the time, is, okay, so from a government perspective, what does that mean? Because, everybody in the room, or most of the presentations so far have been given from industry's perspective, and it's about implementing technologies, but that does have a knock-on to government, and some of the time government doesn't know how to react to that. It comes faster than they're actually ready to do it. And look at it. But it comes from two sides as I see it. It's the disruption in the economy. So, these are the types of solutions where, how do we react to cryptocurrency? So a financial institution wants to use cryptocurrency. How do we react to autonomous vehicles? Are we going to allow it? So it's not within government, but it's in the economy. So how do we react to that? But also, how do we react to disruption within government itself? And I'll start with this one. Probably the best example of that has been Estonia. I think there's no point in going through all the things that you can do online. You look at the things that you can't do online, and they've listed them as 3. So the only things that you can't do with the Estonian government online is get married, get divorced, and buy property. Everything else you can do through an online. Now, that's the gold standards. That's what every government needs to get to. And we're working to do that in Bahrain. We've a government agency, IGA, that actually has made great strides in its e-governance agenda, but it still hasn't hit here. And I think Mohammed probably wouldn't dispute that. We've work to do in terms of how do we get to an Estonia-type model. But it's the expectation that we should. So, it's no longer saying, oh, that's a nice to have. It's actually becoming a must-have. But there are struggles within government to get there. So, we talk about open data. I'm a big proponent of open data. That's fine. I'm pushing from the outside, and I want my startups to get access to that data to build new solutions on that. But if you're sitting on the government side, if you've been the controller of that data, then how do you decide what you should open up, what you shouldn't? How do you decide? Just practically, how do you do it? How do you get it out there? Now, we do hope we're able to do that pretty soon. And I'll talk a little bit later about a policy we have around cloud first. If we're moving government data to the cloud, then it's a great opportunity, if you're categorizing that data anyway, to decide what do you open up and what don't you. The focus on customer service. I think we'll all acknowledge that government isn't probably first on customer service. We don't generally think about the customer, our citizens, and we're getting better at it, but we're not there yet. So that puts a different focus on solutions that are being driven. Outputs and not inputs. If you talk to a Minister of Health and if a journalist is speaking to a Minister of Health and say, how are you improving the health service? They'll talk about, well, we spent this amount of money, we hired this number of nurses and doctors, we opened up this number of beds. They're not looking at how many patients did you treat, did you actually cure last year? How many less patients did you treat this year from last year? So it's looking at the overall health as opposed to number of inputs. From a talent perspective, and this is a big one for government, we're looking at the area of cybersecurity at the moment. So government goes through, we get somebody trained on cybersecurity, they build experience in that, and suddenly they're out into the private sector because they've built an experience and they put a lot of work into that, and then they get an offer from private sector. How do you develop talent within government? How do you keep that talent? And the last part is around dealing with failure. I think it's been spoken a little bit here around, we should be open to failure. But guess what? In a government context, failure isn't really accepted. There's no upside for a government exec to take risks, because the model is different. If you're in a private sector organization, you're encouraged to you're bonus to actually take risks. And if the risks pay off, then there's a great reward. If you're in a public sector, the risks are on the downside as opposed to the upside. So if you do great work, I'm generalizing a little bit here, and I'm looking at some people that might be in the public sector and they get great bonuses. But in general, public sector don't. They don't get this massive bonus if they take a big risk and it works. But they take a big downside if it doesn't work. So unless, and this isn't just from within government, you think about all the failed projects in government. I was part of one. I was working with the Irish Health Service, and we implemented a SAP system that didn't go to plan. And there was no upside for anybody. If it worked the way the way it should have, it would have delivered great savings. But it was too complex a system to actually put in, and it didn't deliver the results. But the executives that worked on that, they got a downside. There was no upside. So the public were the ones that actually made that project not a success. Other knock-ons then, I guess these are the things that new technology does affect. So government worries about jobs. How do I, if there's all this disruption in the economy, what's the effect on jobs? How do I work around skill development? So what are the new areas of skill development that I need to look at? Can I continue to school in the same way? Can I continue to have my universities operate in the same way, and vocational training? Obviously, regulation plays a huge part, and a couple of the bigger areas there around data privacy, crypto, and autonomous vehicles. There's lots of other areas in the healthcare services as well. And obviously taxation, maybe not so relevant in this region, but in other regions, as digitization and where services are being delivered for them, what effect does that have on taxation? There's obviously other knock-on effects as well, but they're just some of the ones. If I come closer to home, there's a number of other disruptive elements that are happening in this region. So the push for diversification of the economy, the move from public to private, the build it rather than buy it. And Kareem is a brilliant example of that, building it locally rather than just implementing somebody else's technology. There's a cultural shift as well in our expectations in this region. And then you've got the technological as well. So actually in this region, you have more complexity around us all than maybe in other regions. So it does make for challenging but very interesting times. The question that I have is, how does the government react to that? How do we embrace technology? How do we use that disruption to drive the economy? And these are the things that maybe we think about in Bahrain right now. And I'll talk about what are we doing in maybe each of these areas to kind of bring a bit of reality to them. But a lot of it is around creating the environment. So the job of government is maybe different to where it was before. The job of government now is creating an environment for others to actually implement in. It's not to do everything for its citizens. And we've very strongly taken that. I mean, we're embracing technology, we're embracing startup, we're trying to create an environment. Open data fits into that, where startups can get ideas and actually implement those, and that government allow them to do that and create a regulatory environment for them to do that. The cultural shift is part of that. How do we encourage more people to get involved and feel that they can implement their solutions? The regulatory environment is a big factor there. How do we ensure that we're not blocking them? We implemented bankruptcy law last year, which is a big move forward for us. If we want disruption, we've got to prepare for failure. Skills and development, again, another area that we're very focused on. And again, funding for innovation. How do we ensure that these elements exist? So if I look at it from a Bahrain perspective and the things that we're doing, so from a regulation perspective, all of these items have been implemented in the last 2 years. So from a Bahrain perspective, there's a lot of progress here. I'm not really going through the technologies that we've implemented. What I'm looking at is how did we create an environment for those technologies to fit into? And that's as important as actually implementing the technologies. So from a regulation perspective, we implemented a cloud-first policy that our government moves to the cloud. So if somebody wants to run a new website, a new service, the question isn't, should I do that in the cloud? The question is, why shouldn't I do it on the cloud? And it's pushing data to the cloud. Now, the driver behind that is cost and efficiencies. Encourage our financial services industry to move and investigate FinTech and understand it and understand the consequences for their industry from FinTech. And that has worked out really well. We've set up a FinTech sandbox, and which allows FinTech companies to come in for a year and test their solutions on live customers with partner banks. And if it works and if they go on to get regulated, the CBB is working hand in hand with them. So that's been a great way to allow the banks to understand, and also allow the central bank to understand what are the new solutions from a FinTech perspective, and how may they apply to Bahrain's financial services industry, and where are the opportunities in a very controlled environment. So it's, you still have that control. You're touching real customers, but there's a control element to it. And that's been a really great example of how to manage a disruptive element in a government context. The other areas that we worked around are skills. So we've been doing a lot of work at schools, at university level, to change the curriculum and change the thinking on how we educate our youth. But we've also been working around vocational training, because we can't wait for 20 years for a youngster to go through their schooling. we actually have to change now. We need to reskill and upskill. We've been doing a lot of programs around AWS Educate because of the move to cloud, encouraging Udacity and Code Academy as well, and trying to upgrade our existing workforce. We've been working in Industry 4.0 and a number of pilot programs in Industry 4.0 to kind of to upgrade our industry as well. We've launched funding programs through our sister agency, Tamkeen, which offer minimal viable funding to startups. We've launched crowdfunding and a fund of funds. And then we've built a whole infrastructure around incubators and accelerators for startups. So the last two areas around the funding and around supports have been really around startups and how do we encourage our own startups. So it's that build versus buy type of mentality that we're trying to build from. Some of the outcomes of that, and you know, we talked a little bit earlier about income inputs and outputs. So everything that I've spoken about up to now has been the inputs, but these are some of the outputs, and I've just summarized a few. So from the FinTech sandbox perspective, we now have 28 companies going through that sandbox. We've 2 graduated. It takes a year to graduate, so it was launched in August the year before, so it takes a while for the companies to run through. But we've a company in open banking and a company in crypto asset management that have gone through the sandbox and have now graduated. The cloud first policy. In terms of AWS Educate, we've 2,500 people that have gone through AWS Educate. From our startup initiative, we started in 2016 with 35 startups. Now, that's not fair to say there was 35 companies set up in Bahrain. There was a lot more. When I talk about a startup, I'm talking about a scalable business. I'm going to use Kareem as an example, but we're nowhere near scale size of Kareem. But it's that type of concept that a company that has the ability to scale within the region and possibly go global. So when we count our startups, that's the type of company that we're looking at, a type of company that a VC would invest in. So in 2016, we had 35. In December 2018, we have 96. So a big move in that space, and some significant investments in a number of those companies, and then built out 4 different accelerators, one in cloud, IoT, FinTech, and a general accelerator. So we're not just looking at what do we put in to make this change happen. We're looking at what are the outcomes as well. From an artificial intelligence, and I thought I should cover something in what we're doing, that I do think from a Bahrain perspective that we're actually quite early in terms of AI. I think I've mentioned to a few different people in the conference here that I think there's a step that needs to be done, certainly in Bahrain, but I believe in the region, around data analytics, data gathering and data cleansing and data analytics before we're really ready for AI. So there's a lot of, training going on in we've a number of hackfests, and we've actually a hackathon targeted with the government as well. But I think before we see massive movement in that space, we'll see a lot of more emphasis on data analytics as opposed to AI, and very quickly then we'll follow into AI. But there is movement, and some of the companies that are working in that space are listed at the end. That's really all I wanted to cover. Happy to take any questions, or happy to speak to any of you later on if you wish to speak further.